Hopefully you have all had a pleasant Christmas and are, well, finished sleeping off the Christmas excesses. Anyway, today's program, I thought I'd look at a few different things which I have been sort of collating over the last few days in my Christmas-induced stupor as I lie on the couch waiting for the Christmas dinner to digest. One of the first things that I looked at this year were comments in the mainstream press and also in the United Kingdom's defence journals about what is happening with the so-called carrier strike force, which the United Kingdom has decided to send to the Pacific theatre to support the Americans, presumably, in their attempts to deter the Chinese government from making any attempts to reclaim Taiwan. Now, whilst it seems like another one of those things that the United Kingdom decides to do when America detects some kind of threat somewhere in the world, that the UK immediately rushes to the aid of its American masters by producing some kind of task force. Now, the last time a carrier task force of this type was actually assembled properly would probably be in 1982, when the Falklands War broke out unexpectedly or expectedly, and Margaret Thatcher rushed out a task force with a carrier strike group like this to sail down to the Falklands. But at that point, the British state knew that it was going to be entering a hot war, and so it sent quite a large task force, including many container ships carrying supplies, landing craft, and dozens of surface vessels and submarines, which is what it would do if it were expecting to fight somebody. But what's happening this time with this carrier strike force is rather more interesting, and I was reading a criticism, a critique, by a former British naval officer writing one of the mainstream newspapers. And what he said was actually deeply worrying. First of all, the strike group, which contains an aircraft carrier, several surface ships and a submarine, is, as he put it, very light in terms of what it can actually do. Because although most of us know about the two aircraft carriers which were built at enormous expense, incidentally, under the previous Labour administration, and also the F35 aircraft, these are the new fifth generation fighter aircraft developed in America, which the British state decided to buy to put on these aircraft carriers. Now, these jets are capable of taking off on a short ramp and then landing vertically back on the deck, a little bit like a slightly different version of the Harrier jump jet, if you like, but a little bit more capable and much, much more stealthy. These aircraft cost a fortune, over £85 million each. But interestingly, the United Kingdom, although originally planned to buy 72 of these aircraft, so that would be approximately 35-ish aircraft per aircraft carrier, they actually have only bought 35, and therefore the strike group that's going out is only carrying 18 aircraft on the aircraft carrier, an aircraft carrier which is capable of supporting 35 aircraft. So it's going out with half the number of planes it really should have. But even at that, according to the writer of this critical article about this naval adventure, that would leave the United Kingdom dangerously, I'm putting here, dangerously under-defended, because half of the entire fighter fleet, if you like, of 35 F-35 aircraft available to defend the UK is going to be in the South China Sea or the Western Pacific, presumably. And that leaves only about 20 aircraft to actually defend the entire UK. Now, of those 20-something aircraft, probably only about 18 of them will actually be flying. The rest will be getting serviced or being used for training purposes or other things. So 18 aeroplanes, jet fighters, to defend the entire United Kingdom skies from any potential aerial threats is not a lot. I mean, in the past, we would have had Typhoons. I think there are still some Typhoon fighters in the United Kingdom's inventory, although I think the squadrons are gradually being phased out in favour of the F-35. We also used to have Tornado fighter bombers, multi-role supersonic aircraft, which could carry out any mission at all, including interceptions, bombing, and low-level ground support. Those are now retired. So what's left is very, very tiny, a very tiny air force, which is split between the land, in other words, squadrons based at airfields, and those which have gone off on this carrier. Now, the other thing that's a problem, according to this particular writer, is that normally when you send a carrier out, it has to be heavily protected by destroyers and also by at least 2 frigates and a nuclear-powered attack submarine to defend against any underwater threats. Now, the United Kingdom has very few surface ships left, and what it does have left, much of it is in port being repaired, or they don't have enough money to crew them. And this is because over the last 40 years or so, successive UK governments have been cutting the funding of the Navy in particular, but generally the armed services across the UK have been cut back further and further and further. The standing army in the UK was, I think, at 85,000. It's now somewhere a lot lower than that, perhaps nearer 50 or 60,000 in the standing army, and that's professional soldiers, not counting the territorial part-time soldiers as well. But it's not much when you think about what is going on in Ukraine at the moment, where there are 4 million trained service personnel fighting in the country at the moment in Europe, and we have somewhere around 60,000 actual service personnel ready to defend these islands and 18 aeroplanes to defend the skies. You can see that we are, as he says, dangerously underprotected. Now, that nuclear umbrella of Trident nuclear missiles, which are in our one single submarine, which is somewhere under the Atlantic all the time, those nuclear missiles have to have launch codes given by the President of the United States, because the missiles themselves are American. The warheads, that's the atomic bombs on the tip of them, belong to the UK, and the submarines belong to the UK. So it's a bit of a mishmash, and actually firing these weapons in response to any perceived missile launch by, say, Russia or China of a ballistic missile with a nuclear capability would be slow, to say the least. And so far, the nuclear deterrent in terms of the Russian-Ukrainian war has only really deterred us. We're the ones who've been deterred from making any nuclear threats. The Russians don't seem to have any rule book when it comes to that, and they seem to be quite happy to make nuclear threats whenever they feel it might be useful. But of course they can't really use them, and they know they can't use them, because if they do, they'd be annihilated. Well, that's the idea, isn't it? But is that an effective way to defend the United Kingdom? Or does it just simply paint a massive target on Faslane's nuclear submarine base near to Glasgow and the Coalport facility, which is a massive nuclear arsenal buried underground, which stores the nuclear warheads for these submarine-launched missiles? All of this sounds like a big recipe for not being able to defend yourself when you've only got 18 airplanes to intercept Russian bombers flying into your airspace. What does that say about the United Kingdom's air defence? So far as I'm aware, we don't have, at least as far as I'm aware, a high altitude surface to air missile defence system which can shoot down a Russian threat from the ground. We have to rely on interceptor fighters to do that for us, and we don't have much of that left. So I think in terms of defence spending, for some bizarre reason, when it comes to defending Scotland, there's almost no money in the bank. But when it comes to defending Taiwan, we're happy to spend over £10 billion collectively on aircraft carriers and too few planes to put on them, and too few surface ships and submarines to protect them. The United Kingdom is operating its defence policy on a shoestring budget, just like everything else the United Kingdom seems to do. Now, on the good news side, I noticed on social media various people reporting that they had been driving over the Alex Salmond Memorial Bridge. Now, this is what was formerly known as the Queensferry Crossing, a name which, like many other Scots, I utterly detested. I know Queensferry is a place on the Forth, but the idea of calling the bridge the Queensferry Crossing just struck me as being another sort of unionist sop, making it sound terribly British. But in fact, the entire triple span cable stay bridge, which we all know looks beautiful, was the brainchild of Alex Salmond. And it was his administration, Scottish administration, which made sure the bridge was built according to specification, under budget and under time. In other words, it came in within the budget and it was built before the contract was due to end, unlike so many other potential infrastructure projects commissioned by the United Kingdom government, which never seem to either be done on time and certainly never ever end up being done under budget. And I think we could point to things like High Speed 2, the rail link, which has got smaller and smaller over the years and is massively behind the time, and is costing billions and billions of pounds more than it was supposed to. So I think it's a fitting tribute to the former First Minister, Alex Salmond, that the bridge should be known as the Alex Salmond Memorial Bridge, because he was the man really who made that happen. His administration at Holyrood was the government which made that bridge possible. And it is the most beautiful bridge, I think, in Scotland. It's a gorgeous structure and you can see it for miles, and it is a beautiful piece of both architecture and engineering. Now, according to some reports I've read, the name, the Alex Salmond Memorial Bridge, is actually now in Google Maps. And I'm not sure if that's true, so maybe perhaps one or two of you might like to check Google Maps and find out if it actually is now being known in Google Maps as the Alex Salmond Memorial Bridge. That could just be a little bit of fun, possibly, but we'll see. But I think if it isn't already officially known as the Alex Salmond Memorial Bridge, it really, really should be. Now, there are the various articles appearing both online and in the mainstream media, but in the online world, one of the comments I've seen recently from a pro-independence blogger was that with support for Scottish independence now somewhere around 59%, and that was if we first of all have a republic and we have a well-being economy as part of the offer. But the fact that 59% of those polled in the recent poll actually said they would vote for independence under those conditions and with those sort of conditions applied shows us that the support for independence is not falling back, it's actually growing. And as it's growing, it's reaching, or just about to reach, that magic 60% number, so long as whoever is running the independence campaign links the campaign to these two things: the idea of a Scottish republic, dropping the monarchy, and the idea of having a well-being economy as one of the features of that independence offer. Now, I know that in the past the SNP has been reluctant to tie independence to such things as a republic or to the idea of a well-being economy, even though we all know that both of these concepts are extremely popular amongst voters. But according to some experts I've been talking to and some people who are familiar with this, the reason why we cannot simply have a republic straight away on independence is because of the Union of the Crowns. And under Scots law, that would require a separate vote for us to ditch the monarchy after independence, although that could be part of the plan. You know, as soon as independence is achieved, we have a second referendum to get rid of the monarchy, and thereafter we can also perhaps, even if we wanted to, have another referendum to decide whether we want a well-being economy or the neoliberal model which has served us so badly for the last 40-50 years. Now, as well as that, Peter Bell, who, as you know, is a well-known independence blogger and who formed recently the New Scotland Party, had sent a blog post out recently. And I like this because basically he was saying, let's make 2025 a year of defiance. Now, I think that is probably going to become my New Year resolution, to defy all attempts at unionist rule or English rule in Scotland, and to start disobeying things and basically flouting all of these so-called British rules and challenging everything that comes up. And I think we should all do that. But one of the things that bothers me at the moment is the fact that with 59% of the popular vote in favour of independence, we've heard nothing at all from John Swinney's administration on how they plan to capitalise on the popularity of independence. It's all the stuff that we're hearing from the Swinney administration is about how he's going to make the governance of Scotland better. Now, the governance of Scotland had been pretty good up until the point where Nicola Sturgeon took over the reins. And then midway through her term, things started to go pear-shaped, and she started to disappear up blind alleys of gender politics instead of holding the promised independence referendum, which she said would be triggered if we left the EU against our will, which happened. And that promised referendum had never materialised. And since that time, I think the SNP administration, now under John Swinney, seem completely clueless about what to do next. But what's needed next year, and in fact going forward into the next 2 years before the next Holyrood elections, is a major campaign to bring all the threads of independence, its movement, its parties together, at least fighting for the same thing, even if there is not any kind of electoral pact between parties, at least if they're campaigning for the same goal, and it has to be stated as the primary goal with no other goals on the manifesto, then we would have a chance. But as I said many times before, whoever you vote for in 2026, if you're voting for pro-independence parties, you need to lean on them really hard and tell them what you want them to put in their manifesto, because otherwise they simply won't listen. So I think it's a year of defiance next year, not just defiance of unionism and not just defiance of English control and the exploitation of Scotland's resources, but also defiance of our own independence parties who are refusing to do anything about independence. I think it's time we challenge them, all of them, to come clean, and all of them to state their primary purpose in 2026 is to form a government which will take back all the powers which Holyrood has had stripped from it, and to use those powers to hold a referendum under, I think, the guidance of the UN and its observers, and with an International Court of Justice ruling that we have the right to self-determination to back us up. Without these two steps of taking back the powers to Holyrood and doing so under our right to self-determination under international law, it's very hard for us to actually fight back against the UK and its arguments that this wouldn't be legal. Of course it would be legal, but we need to establish that as well, so that we have that backup already in place. It's much harder for the UK to defy or deny us anything if the rest of the international community is behind Scotland, which I am certain it would be if we make the right representations now. Anyway, that's my message for the period between Christmas and New Year. I'll probably do a New Year program at some point once I've sobered up on New Year's Day. Perhaps I'll do something on the 2nd. But I think next year is an opportunity for all of us to step things up a gear, because the people of Scotland are sovereign, and because we are sovereign, we're the ones who should be steering our parties of independence towards taking back powers for Holyrood in 2026, and that really has to be our target. So Peter Bell, thank you for giving me my New Year's resolution of making 2025 my year of defiance, and I hope your year of defiance as well. I wish you all Happy New Year when it comes, and then you enjoy the festivities safely, and I'll see you in 2025. That's it from Inde-Car today. Keep the faith. Bye for now.